very warm welcome to all our members and our guests who have braved this chilly midwinter's day to come here, probably dragged you away from your Olympic watching as well, and to join us for our July monthly lunchtime lecture. Now today we're turning the focus back onto Australian defence industry, and I'll ask our events coordinator and Vice President of RUSI Ron Lyons to introduce today's speaker.
Thanks, Kim, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 7th in our lecture series for 2024. The title of today's lecture is Australian Defence Industry, Enhancing Sovereign Defence Capability, the Challenges and Future Prospects, and it will be presented by Mr. Lincoln Parker from the Defence Innovation Network and a commentator on defence, national security and energy security issues. Lincoln has been active in defence and national security policy development. He's also a weekly guest on the Sky News program Erin and a regular voice on Radio 2GB. He has a degree from Berkeley in the United States and has worked in national security fields in San Francisco, New York and Washington DC. He also represented New South Wales in rowing. He has 3 children and is a long-time cricket coach at the Harbord Devils Cricket Club. Would you please welcome Lincoln Parker to the podium?
Well, thank you very much. I'm just about to kick off a new season of cricket. Trying to get under 16-year-old boys to do what you want them to do is not easy. When there's about 15 or 16 of them, you can just imagine how that goes down. Fortunately, I have twin boys who are 15 turning 16 soon, so I've had 16 years of experience learning how to wrangle twin boys who aren't exactly timid. They're like Rottweiler puppies with the attention span of a flea, and don't really like listening to orders. But cricket is a wonderful sport. I think it's our national sport, and I think it's great for children, and I've seen it over the years that I've been coaching, and I think that's something that we should continue. And it runs into a theme that I'll address in the speech today too, with regard to voluntary national service and what are we going to do about the next generations that are coming up, whether that be our kids or our grandkids and so forth. So I'm going to be talking about defence industry and touching on a few other themes today, but essentially, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honour, and I really mean that, to address the Royal United Services Institute of New South Wales today. My speech will focus on the current state of the Australian defence industry, highlighting its achievements, threats and opportunities. I will draw insights from the Defence Strategic Review, as well as my own involvement in the Defence Innovation Network, local industry, the US defence environment and the recent strategy that my own network, DIN, has undertaken with our 9 universities and the Defence Science and Technology Group to provide a comprehensive look at the industry's challenges and potential solutions. Additionally, I will discuss the importance of a robust national service scheme, voluntary, and the lessons Australia can learn from places like Sweden, who has a very robust manufacturing industry, as you probably know. Furthermore, I will examine the implications of the AUKUS initiative on Australia's defence industry and national security. Whoa, look at that. I wanted to provide some context to the defence picture and the defence debate today, and how better to do that than a map, particularly for all of you military guys and girls. This will be something familiar to you, and it kind of puts things into perspective as to the world as it stands now, and particularly our region, and how important it is. So these are the pressure points. There's a lot of them, and you're aware, of course, that we are a trading nation. Almost all of our trade goes up in and out of that region in front of you. Now, if that is to be threatened, what happens to our trade? Do we have contingency plans for it? Are we discussing this with the public? Have we discussed it with business? I'm not sure that the answer to that is yes. I have not heard it, but I certainly think, particularly given what is going on in the world, that it is a conversation worth having. So, let's talk about challenges and achievements in the defence industry as we ponder that. Despite some achievements, the Australian defence industry faces numerous challenges. Defence is working exceptionally hard on a huge number of separate internal reviews, studies and reorganisations in response to the Defence Strategic Review and policy announcements from the current and previous government. This will not be a surprise to you if you've been studying defence policy in Australia over the last 1,000 years. Lots and lots of reviews. It is not clear what will emerge from this effort. There is no obvious path forward on the future shape of the Navy surface fleet, for instance, nor is there yet a new design for Army after reducing the infantry fighting vehicle program. The bulk of announcements in the recently released 2023 AUSMIN communique are about US rather than Australian or joint activities in the north. We are no closer to a strategy for manufacturing missiles in our country. While the new Advanced Strategic Capability Accelerator, ASCA, something I'm well aware of, has been launched, it's not clear how it will surpass the lacklustre performance of previous innovation programs. Because in my business, we've seen ASCA just called something else and reorganised and renamed and reorganised and renamed. There is no clearly explained path to improve Defence's capacity to innovate or to fix recruitment or to measurably strengthen the organisation's key messages to, quote, shape, deter and respond. Similarly, there's no real signs Defence knows how to strengthen Australia's defence industry either. I wanted to include this slide because, firstly, it's a cool looking plane, but secondly, it's very useful. It is a long-range stealth bomber. You'll all remember the F-111. Australians loved the F-111. We bought that, acquired it for a very good reason. Yes, there were problems in the beginning when we acquired it, over budget and over time, those sorts of things, but it did its job for Australia. It did exactly what we wanted it to do, to provide deterrence. Now, I'm not entirely sure why we didn't even consider discussing this and acquiring it, particularly as we saw last week. The Australian government has pumped in $800 million into the Loyal Wingman, which is now known as the Ghost Bat, which is a much better name apparently, program with Boeing, and has now decided that it will not be armed and that it'll just be a reconnaissance and surveillance platform because we don't need armed drones that are stealthy. But we've already purchased surveillance drones. We purchased the Triton platform. So, I just think that we need to be having this discussion in public a little more, where we can, so that we're understanding of what we could do and why we're not doing certain things, and therefore putting a little bit more pressure on those that are making decisions, no matter what government is in power. So, Australia's defence industry is looking for two things. The first is an opportunity to participate in the strategic level thinking needed to bring clarity to a situation of increasing policy disorder. The government, parliament and defence need to create mechanisms that allow industry to operate as, quote, fundamental inputs to capability. Central to this idea is that industry is treated as a trusted partner where genuine collaboration with defence brings quick innovation. Now that's something we just don't see. We do not see genuine collaboration with defence. I'm not saying it's their fault, it just doesn't happen. And it's very little quick innovation, which is why organisations like mine were established. So we are not Department of Defence, we are not government. Our benefactor essentially is Hugh Durrant-White, the Chief Scientist of New South Wales, himself former Chief Defence Scientist of the UK MOD. We have a very small budget and about 3 people, with 9 universities, and we fund over 6 projects every year. And we spit out world-leading innovation. You can see that on our website, defenceinnovationnetwork.com. We do get a little bit of funding from Defence Science and Technology Group, which is ring-fenced and goes into a pay for half of one of our major projects. And they also provide us with a defence scientist that works with us. But it shouldn't be that the states are funding federal defence capabilities. But that's exactly what's happening. To give you some comparison, ASCAR that I just mentioned recently has 80 employees. And I'm not sure how many projects they've commissioned. So, second, defence industry needs policy predictability. Industry must be confident that long-term investment in plant and workforce skills will ultimately lead to sustained returns. Now, that seems obvious. Without such confidence overseas, industry will not come or stay here, and local industry will not diversify into defence projects or even remain in the field. Successive Australian governments keep changing defence capability goalposts. Australia is developing a reputation as an investment sovereign risk in this field. Why would an international company or an Australian company plan to build defence capability here when, in 5 or 10 years or less, a government announcement could undermine years of investment? There's no certainty, there's no predictability. A lesson is that defence struggles to keep up with the twists and turns of responding to policy thought bubbles tied to the 3-year political cycle. How the department deals with this gives rise to a second policy risk with industry: isolation from policy development. They're not involved or included. One defence coping mechanism is to push off contact with industry on any aspect of new opportunities for cooperation. Far from treating industry as a fundamental input to capability, where engagement might lead to a shared approach to innovation or delivery, defence keeps industry at arm's length as the department struggles to understand how it must respond to government policy changes. And I get that. They do this while avoiding giving an impression it's getting ahead of the government. The result is that too many policy initiatives get in the way of delivering anything real. The promise of a new policy to be delivered at some point in the future often leads defence to advise industry that contact should be delayed until the policy is endorsed by government. This has been a constant refrain of the department since the 2016 Defence White Paper was released. It took 2 years to develop the 2016 White Paper during the tenure of 2 Prime Ministers and 3 Defence Ministers. While this process was underway, industry was told to wait to engage with the department until the White Paper was finalised. So just down tools and wait. Not easy to do when you're running a company. Once released in February 2016, industry was told to wait while the department recalibrated around delivering the new IIP. Industry was then told to wait for the 2019 election outcome before substantive engagement could happen, then to wait for the 2020 strategic update, then to wait for AUKUS arrangements to be settled, then for the subsequent 2022 election, then for the Defence Strategic Review. You get the gist. You see why very little gets done. One of the main threats to the Australian defence industry is the increasing competition from other countries, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. China's military build-up is now the largest and most ambitious of any country since the end of the Second World War, according to the Defence Strategic Review itself. This poses a significant challenge for Australia's defence industry, as it must keep pace with the rapid advancements in technology and capabilities. But how? Another threat is the lack of a skilled workforce in the defence industry. The ADF has a growing demand for highly skilled personnel, but there is a shortage of qualified workers. This shortage not only affects the industry's ability to deliver on projects, but also hampers innovation and the development of new technologies. But despite these challenges, there are several opportunities for the Australian defence industry to grow and improve. The government's commitment to increasing defence spending, as outlined in the 2024 National Defence Strategy and Integrated Investment Program, IIP, that I mentioned before, provides an opportunity for the industry to invest in R&D, innovation and the acquisition of new capabilities. But to date, industry is sceptical for all of the reasons I've just mentioned. They don't believe it. They've seen these promises, reviews occur on an almost annual basis for the past 20 years. If they were to capitalise on these opportunities, if these opportunities eventuate, the Australian defence industry should focus on several key areas, which would include, and which is what we need, to develop a highly skilled workforce through education and training programs. Sounds nice, but how do you do it? Where do you get the workers from? Is anybody interested? Strengthening partnerships with international defence companies and research institutions, but again, you've got to solve some of those funding and certainty issues we talked about. Investing in R&D to foster innovation and the development of new technologies. I can tell you industry would love to do that. Love to. But I'll give you an example from my own business. Or organisation, network. I told you that we fund about 6 projects every year, 4 sort of smaller, what we call mid-TRL. TRL means technology readiness level, so in the mid-TRL region, and 2 from a higher TRL up to prototype. Now the idea behind these is for us to fund these, and we do it very quickly, and we produce a prototype at the end of about 2 years at quite a small cost. And the idea was then that, and Department of Defence is brought along the entire way with this. They're part of it, even though we're funding it. The idea was that after we've done this, that they would then fund it a little bit further, to take it from prototype into commissioning. It's not a great deal of money. We've had almost over 5 years no uptake. So you can imagine why industry would feel this way. I think we also need to enhance collaboration between government, industry and academia to create a more integrated defence ecosystem. And this is along the same lines that all of the players need to be involved from the very beginning, and that's kind of what we're talking about. Everyone needs to be involved, the input needs to be there, but until you have policy certainty and funding certainty, it's not going to matter a great deal. I did want to talk about Sweden's manufacturing industry, because we used to manufacture in Australia quite a lot of things. It peaked in the 1960s when manufacturing was about 25% of GDP. Today, it's hovering around 5 or less than 5% of GDP. Now people say, Link, hang on, we can't ever be a manufacturing nation because our labour costs are too high, which is why I wanted to use this example of Sweden. labour costs are higher. Productivity's higher, sure. They also have a cheap energy input with 6 reactors. Even our sugarcane mills are struggling. They're high, very intense users of energy. Steel mills, not so many left. Automotive manufacturing gone, white good manufacturing gone. They've all succumbed to economic pressures and global competition, or in other words, offshoring. But Sweden, despite a smaller population, has managed to maintain a robust manufacturing industry. You can see the production of well-known brands such as Saabs, Volvos, Gripen fighter jets, as well as a range of white goods. They're even competitive within Europe. They currently have 6 operational nuclear power reactors, which provide a significant portion of their electricity. Because a nation reliant on importing essential goods compromises its economic security and sovereignty. We must revitalise our manufacturing sector to reduce dependence on foreign imports and safeguard our national interests. In my opinion, it really is that simple and not discussed enough. How do we get all of these new ideas into place? How do we get new skilled workers and solve some of these problems? Are we looking at solving some of the root causes of these issues rather than sort of flying over 10,000 feet? I'm saying that potentially to address the challenges in the defence industry and revitalise manufacturing in Australia, the country should consider implementing a voluntary national service scheme for 18-year-old Australians and above. I've talked about this for about 3 years. I first started talking about it with Professor John Blaxland of the ANU. He came up with an acronym called AUSNACS, Australian Universal Service, National Service and Community, something along those lines, but voluntary. The scheme could offer young people the opportunity to serve in the Australian Defence Force or in community service roles. So, SES, Emergency Services, Fire Brigade, Ambulance, helping the homeless, aged care, something in your community where you're giving back, where young people are doing service to give back, where they are taught sort of things like the country is bigger than you, that you don't need to be on TikTok or on your mobile device all day, every day, and that you can give back and contribute to your country and be under role models and actually help, because we need a lot of help. In return, volunteers could be given assistance for university or TAFE or trade training schemes. We've seen the popularity of these schemes in Scandinavian countries where the programs are actually oversubscribed. They didn't think it would be that popular. It turns out that it is. Because it turns out that kids do enjoy teamwork. They do like being with their mates, learning about serving something larger than themselves. And by the way, employers overwhelmingly choose candidates who have completed voluntary and national community service above those that did not. Of course. Because we cannot keep deploying the ADF to every fire, flood or emergency that occurs. That is not their role, nor is it sustainable. Very expensive. And it's not what the ADF, I'm sure the ADF is happy to do it because that's the sort of people that they are. They're serving their country. But that's not why they joined the ADF, and they need to be training for their particular roles in the ADF. We need to pay more attention to the people actually serving in the ADF. Buying shiny, expensive equipment and making grand strategies matters little if we don't address the root problems. In 2024, the ADF was more than 4,300 personnel below its authorised strength. representing a shortfall of almost 7%. This decline is a threat to the nation's planned military overhaul. You can have all of these great plans, but if you have more people leaving the ADF every year and not very many joining, well, then it's a dying institution. You can't do anything in an institution where more people are leaving than joining. The 2023 Defence Strategic Review highlighted the need for innovative and bold approaches to recruitment and retention in the ADF, which is seeking to grow by 30% by 2040. How? The ADF has struggled to meet its existing recruitment targets, with the number of enlisted declining by 3.5% over the past 5 years, while the number of military star ranked officers has increased by over 20%. The recruitment crisis in the ADF has been attributed to various factors, including the toll of service life on families, which is true. I speak with a number of uniformed personnel a lot. Sometimes they're given very little notice and then deployed, and they have to pack up their family and their wife and their kids to somewhere else. The need for more competitive salaries for specialised staff, and the need to improve family-friendly policies. The ADF has also faced criticism for its recruitment practices, with some arguing that the focus on quotas and not merit has hindered the organisation's ability to attract and retain personnel. And this year we became aware that on average it is taking the ADF 12 months to onboard a new recruit. One would imagine that many recruits would either choose not to go through this, find another job in the meantime and not proceed, or get fed up. It really sets a tone of incompetence which one hopes is not setting that as a standard. We must address these issues and also begin to hold people accountable. That's not to say you didn't try hard, and it's not to say you're not a good person. Fine. But if you failed, it's clearly not the role for you, and we're going to have to relieve you of what you're doing and find something else. When was the last time we saw that in defence? I suspect during a war. But in the private sector it happens every day. AUKUS, buzzword. The AUKUS initiative, which aims to strengthen the security and defence capabilities of Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States, presents both opportunities and challenges for Australia's defence industry. While the Biden-Harris administration sees AUKUS as a way to make Australia take a stronger leadership role in Indo-Pacific security, there are concerns that Australia has been free-riding on America's military presence in Asia for decades. The Albanese government gives no tangible sign that it wants to shoulder a greater security burden, and defence spending is planned to grow minimally over the rest of this decade in real numbers. The AUKUS initiative includes Pillar 2, which I'm involved with, or supposed to be, which covers 11 additional technology areas, including quantum, artificial intelligence, cyber and undersea technologies and hypersonic vehicles. Now, these activities are important and worthwhile. There are concerns that the defence organisations of the AUKUS countries have had little idea about what to do with Pillar 2, and I see that in everyday work. We've heard a lot about it, but there's no plan, there's no funding to back up that plan. So if you don't have funding and a plan to follow, then what is it? There's also a need for greater engagement with Australian industry to ensure that it plays a role in the development of these new technologies. Of course. But we can't do that. With all of the 9 universities I'm involved with, we can't go to industry and tell them anything because we don't know anything. We can't tell them this is what we're developing and this is how you should be tooling up and getting ready, because I don't know whether it'll ever be procured. So let's conclude again with some context, having a look at our region and how things may have changed over the last decade or so. You can see that we're not completely isolated anymore. That line goes sort of down under, connecting very close to Perth. Look, you're all aware of the first island chain. That's where all our trade goes through, up here. That island there, Taiwan, essentially breaks the PLA completely out, which is why one reason they want it. We're in a precarious situation if you read the news. China has a number of problems which only make it more dangerous. They have a rapidly ageing population, they have enormous amounts of debt, and they do not have a flexible system to solve those problems. They will have unrest, and one way in single-party dictatorships to overcome domestic problems and unrest is to have the country rally around the flag. They have stated publicly many times that they will take Taiwan, and that would be an easy way to do it, which would be impactful on Australia, impactful on our trade for sure, absolutely. And whether the government of the day decided to help the free 24 million people of Taiwan and our United States allies is, I don't know whether that would happen or not, but we would still be impacted nonetheless. So I think the industry is at a critical juncture. We have made significant achievements in past years, but we face numerous challenges that threaten the ability to meet our defence needs. We just do. To overcome these challenges, we've got to focus on those things I spoke about. Skilled workforce, and getting that skilled workforce. Innovation, but actually doing it with concrete funding lines, and strengthening partnerships with our stakeholders, partners. Revitalising a manufacturing sector to reduce dependence on foreign imports and safeguard our economic security and sovereignty. In that scenario I mentioned there, I kind of didn't mention imports. I mentioned that we rely on trade. So we make all our money by shipping things into that region of the world. What I didn't focus on was where are we going to get our medicines from if we can't get ships out of that region? Or the key inputs that go into our industry. They all come from there. Where are they going to come from? We're only manufacturing 5% of GDP in Australia. We're importing key inputs to our economy. Now, if they're not here, or the medicines, or oil, what happens? So, I think AUKUS can present us with some opportunities, but I think we need to do more than just talk about it. I think we need to plan and implement and fund with certainty. I think we need to allay the concerns that Australia has been free riding on America's military presence in Asia. And there's a need for greater engagement with Australian industry to ensure that it actually does play a role in the development of the technologies in Pillar 2 of AUKUS rather than just talk about them. Because they don't see them. There's been no projects commissioned. This requires direction, investment, certainty, and importantly, leadership. Now that comes from the government of the day, no matter who they are. You need a strong leader, both at the Prime Minister level and the Minister for Defence have to be strong and go out there and say unpopular things and do unpopular things initially, but actually do it for the country and do it for the right reasons. Now I know this hasn't been uplifting. Unfortunately, discussions on foreign policy, national security and particularly defence policy aren't uplifting because we're in the position we're in. But I think it's important, particularly with a group of you who've served, that we tell the truth and we look at it from a point of realism, not what we think it would be great. And no, this is about the future of our country and our kids and grandkids and what's going to happen in the very near future, and asking these questions and making sure we're prepared. Thank you for having me. It really is an honour.
Thank you. Very interesting. I think what you're saying about Australia's sort of manufacturing problems is across the whole manufacturing sector, not just the defence manufacturing.
Oh, no, that's right.
I was brought up, I spent a year working with UPS engineering faculty. They wanted me to go and speak to small firms to see what they wanted from their engineers. And I spent a year speaking to a whole range of small businesses. Came back and told the department. What they said was they had no problem with their engineering. What they wanted, people who could talk to their clients and understand client needs. And I remember the head of the school looked at me and said, these students come at 7 in the morning and leave at 7 at night, and we don't have enough time to teach them all the engineering. Where are we going to find time to teach them business stuff? And I thought, that's exactly the problem. They want to teach engineering. They see the problem, but they're not prepared to do anything that changes their principles. And with respect to innovation, the same sort of problem. Our bright researchers who go into university want to do research for knowledge's sake. They don't want to do it for business, which is not a problem that the US has, or France has, or even Japan has. The way in which they train their people, there isn't that cultural gap. We share that problem, I understand, with Britain. I looked around the world in a whole number of industries. And I think these are the things. I don't think it's got to do with what students want or whether they care about their country. I think we have a cultural problem between universities and business. They're brought up differently. They don't understand each other. I had one, I'll keep this brief. I had one client who was trying to go for a grant, and we were told that the chance of a grant increases if we get a university on side. And we did, went out to Western Sydney, spoke to the head of engineering there, told them what we did. They said, love it, we'd get on with it. I said, oh great, we have to have this application in next week, so can you help us put it together? He said, what? He said, no, he said, I couldn't do this until I finished term at the end of November, then I have to present it to the university board. They have no idea of business timescales and priorities and preferences. And that's what we have to tackle. I don't know how we do that, because going back right to the beginning of universities in Australia.
Yeah, so I'll make a quick comment on that. Yeah, we hear that issue as well. There's a need for a recalibration in education, for sure. It's a common refrain that businesses will say, we love it when we get students in, and they love working in businesses because of those reasons, but we don't do it very much. I think the broader question is one of communication, and there is very little communication between the fundamental inputs of the economy, which mean funding, adequate funding, planning and resourcing with skilled workers. They're siloed, and one doesn't understand the other, and so therefore we have a breakdown, and we need to address that. Agreed. Yes, sir.
A fascinating chart. You've called it maximum missile range. I would call it standoff distance, because that's the deterrent. Why are there no lines on your diagram emanating out of continental Australia to show us our relative current position? Thank you.
I don't know. That's just the graph that I found.
Do we have any standoff distance?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Sorry. I'd have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, I can answer that. The refuel range of the F-35 with a missile is about 1,000 k. Then you put on that the missile that it launches, which is about 300 k. So 1,300 k. From Darwin out there, that's why we need forward operating bases.
Yeah. So that would take it, if that distance from Darwin, that's 2,000 kilometres there.
Terence O'Brien, RUSI with a background in defence manufacturing and the Army Reserve. Going back once upon a time, I joined the Army Reserve. It took 2 days to be issued medical, the works, and at the end of the week I commenced recruit training. Why is it taking 12 months now to achieve that? And a lot of people that should be accepted are not accepted.
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, that's incredible. 2 days, and then you commence training at the end of that week.
Correct.
From the time that you applied.
Yes. From the time I applied.
Yes, same with me.
Wow.
Not only me, but a lot of people here.
Wow.
I'm Malcolm Brown, freelance journalist as well.
The thing that occurs to me, I did my national service and I was 69 to 72, did the officer training course, but I left, and then some of my mates stayed on as officers, and from 1972 till 1999, nothing happened. There was no conflict and no wars, and that saw out their military careers. And even 99 was just deployment to East Timor, was not much of a war. There was one enemy killed, one Australian killed in a forklift accident. There was nothing. Now, it's hot up a little bit since, but what you've got is this huge preparations and nothing happens. In 1991 I was deployed with the Australian Navy to the Gulf War as a war correspondent. I kitted up at the Victoria Barracks. The sergeant major said to me there, well, at least you're getting over there, and we're not. And the problem now is that you're getting all this steered up and motivated and nothing happens for years and years and decades, and there's a morale problem, as I said, within the Defence Forces, and people say, well, why should we join anyway?
Chris,
Go, Chris.
G'day. Main question is about the Defence Industry Development Strategy, which was issued earlier this year, and what is your view of how it may or may not help? If I could add as a rider to that, in the recent government reshuffle, Minister Conroy has now taken over not only defence industry but also defence capability delivery. What's that going to do, and how does that relate to the development strategy?
Well, yeah, I thought that Minister Conroy was already Minister for Defence Industry.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
But now he's also Defence Capability Delivery.
Okay. Who's he taking over? Who was
from Miles. So Minister Miles has now got less of a portfolio, and Conroy's got a bigger one.
I see. I also see in the restructure they've moved around a lot of the national security portfolios in and out of Home Affairs into Attorney Generals. And so there's some question over in the national security area of what's going on, and but with DIDS,
the Defence Industry Development Strategy, and what the reaction is, and how does the Defence Innovation Network feel about it?
Well, from a Defence Innovation Network perspective, we'll be happy when we see money going towards funding innovation that includes industry. So we, as I said, we get very, very little money from the federal government, from the Department of Defence, and the money that we do get is ring-fenced and goes into just 50% of one project that we commission each year. And that's good. We don't need it, but it's good, and it's good that they're involved. For us, as I suspect the same for industry wants to see the certainty And, I think there's just scepticism because 20 years we see a lot of these reviews and industry statements and white papers being developed but then not really implemented and funded. I think the initial perspective from the Department of Defence when DIN was doing, and we're still undertaking our strategy, was that the defence industry, the DIDS program, one of a better word, was to be looked forward to and great if it occurs, and how will it change from the past? We're not sure. But from DIN's perspective, we don't rely on the federal government. Unfortunately, we work very little with defence industry because we're only allowed to fund our universities. Our universities can contract with industry where appropriate, but for all the reasons I just mentioned, they're not willing to commit to doing any substantial research and development in Australia because they don't see the return on investment. And even when we approach the very large American primes, or even Thales, they go, well, no, we're not going to do any R&D in Australia because we do it all in our parent country, the United States or France or wherever. Unfortunately, innovation, it's a fact that innovation is what really drives an economy, technology development, and therefore increasing productivity. But our investment in R&D that we need is just not guaranteed, and there's just not that certainty, which is really unfortunate. It would be great if the government could go, maybe hand it off to a bunch of organisations like mine and sort of take the bureaucracy out of it, because we're very lean and very efficient. We work very quickly. That could be a strategy, or just give bipartisan. If they sat down, if the two big parties could sit down and go, this really is an issue, and it's not just for defence. It should be R&D, across the board. Then I think that would help. But it is what it is.
Hi, it's Fabian. I'm a member of RUSI. I was just wondering how the war in the Ukraine has kind of chucked out traditional defence sort of strategies, and especially procurement policies. I mean, I don't think they're quite sure what to do in the future with military force. Is this playing a big role in this muddled thinking coming out of the Department of Defence?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mentioned cancelling not arming the Ghost Bat, a loyal wingman that we've put $800 million into and a lot of time, effort, resources, people, to just to be another surveillance platform, even though we have a very expensive Triton platform. Now, one of the reasons given for that, there's a number of reasons. One, the Australian government was unable to convince the Americans that they should invest in it too and use it. And in my opinion, that's a failure. They really ought to have done a better job on that. That's just a personal opinion. The other reason was that they said, well, Boeing is not being used in this particular instance, by the US Air Force. Therefore, the integration, there's no integration there of the offensive weapons you'd want to put on this are going to be different to the integrator in the United States that's working with USAF. Now, I don't buy that. I mean, it's true, but we should also be looking we shouldn't always be saying, oh, we're just going to do exactly what the Americans are doing. We're going to wait always until we know what they're doing, and then we're going to pay an exorbitant amount of money to use their integrators, Raytheon, whoever it is. And you mentioned Ukraine. Now, this is a good example. The Ukrainians took American missiles and put them on a Soviet-era Sukhoi, right, with an iPad in the cockpit, right? So they didn't go and pay Raytheon billions of dollars and take years, because they don't have years to do this integration. They whacked missiles on a Sukhoi and put an iPad in it, right? So I think we need to be thinking, I'm not saying we can do that for all of our stuff, and I'm just giving an example, but I'm just saying we need to be thinking like that and about our own defence and our own areas, as opposed to always going along with what the Yanks are doing and paying exorbitant amounts of money and waiting for their decisions. Is that kind of...
Yeah, just thinking maybe the military themselves don't know where to invest money given this war, because major capital ships and tanks are just getting ripped to pieces by $10 equipment that you will destroy. You know, where do you go in the future?
Well, we know where we're going to be fighting. We're going to be fighting in the South China Sea, well, maybe. Well, we know that's where the next major conflict is, let's put it that way. So you're dealing with a big maritime environment, lots of archipelagos fighting, resupply, logistics, missiles, trying to identify drones and take them out and all that. So that they're well understood. That's well understood. Now, whether we're planning for that or not, I don't see it. Perhaps they're doing it behind closed doors and not telling anybody. I don't know. But you don't really see that. But we're well aware of that. And if that's been your job for the last 50 years to look after Australia, you know that's our region and you know that's where the strife's going to be. The Chinese have been saying they're going to take Taiwan for 80 years. And they've been ramping that rhetoric up enormously over the last 5 years, and even more so over the last year. So I don't know how many more times the President of China needs to say it before the West goes, oh, they're going to take Taiwan. So, yeah, should we be doing more with drones? Should we have a lot of armed offensive drones? Absolutely. Yeah.
David Lease. We met just before lunch, Lincoln. I'm a former president and chair of the Special Interest Group on Strategy. I noticed your question fairly early in your presentation when you said, why did Australia not consider the B-21 Raider in the Defence Strategic Review? And you asked the question that when did we retire the F-111? As I understand it from inside sources, which I'm not able to elaborate on, the B-21 Raider wasn't considered. Well, that's not true. The B-21 Raider was considered, but it was seen as providing offensive deterrence.
Yeah.
And the policy, which I don't think was really made clear to the public, but which was a driver for the Defence Strategic Review, as I understand it, was that it needed to be defensive, and that was what they meant when they were talking about a strategy of denial. They see denial as a defensive strategy, and they're really talking about the denial of essentially the archipelago, preventing anyone coming to Australia through the archipelago. And they want to do that as far forward as they possibly can, reach as far forward as it's possible to do so, but they don't want to be clearly challenging China, putting China itself, bases in China and so on, under threat. That is the best that I can understand where they're coming from. So they hope by being able to deny passage through the archipelago that they would create deterrence.
Right. Thank you for that. I personally think that's a shame. I think you get a lot of deterrence from an offensive position too. Offence is the best defence, is powerful.
I agree. Yeah. And when I asked the question, well, what about the AUKUS SSNs? And surely that's primarily oriented towards the South and East China Seas and creating deterrence in that environment. And they said, well, that's an anomaly.
It's an anomaly. Okay, so the other thing that I would note for this audience is that we were shown last week during exercises in the Pacific by the US Navy and the US Air Force that they were able to adapt a relatively cheap unguided bomb, which they guided, but it's not something that's overly expensive, to be dropped from a stealth B-2, but which the B-21s will eventually carry. So they are able to provide a massive deterrence at standoff and at stealth, and sunk a ship at sea. And I thought, that's a bit of a game changer, because suddenly you don't know where it's coming from, obviously, right? So you can't detect. That's the point of the stealth technology, and you're using munitions that aren't overly expensive. But we'll never know for Australia. But that, to my mind, is deterring. I wanted to apologise too to Jera, because I just noticed that I had this question here from you, which I can't read all, but did you want to summarise it?
A lot of it came up in the talk about Australia having a robust independent ability in order to create a redundancy factor. That is, that if there's global conflagration, which we're seeing part of already with climate change and overpopulation, that Australia be able to stand on its own feet or assist others, and in cooperation with our region, where locally our neighbours are good friends of ours. Indonesia's got hundreds of millions of people, and we're a bit short on them in a war with China, for example. So my question is, with regard to creating that robust defence, does defence industry have built in also some countervailing measures with regard to the purpose of a defence industry, which is a peaceful region? So some methodologies built into the logics to create peace in our region.
It's an interesting question. Nothing's built in for defence industry. Defence industry takes orders. But I think there's something more profound in the question than that, is that if you say that we're trying to prepare for peace, then essentially you're saying that there's an opportunity for war. So you would look at Australia in that sense, and our neighbours, our nearest neighbours, and you would then ask yourself, well, have we ever invaded another country? Has the Australian Defence Force ever invaded another country? Are we worried about Australia going to war on someone else? Well, no, I don't think so. Indonesia or anybody else. So therefore, we're sort of acknowledging that there is a threat of war, and it's coming from one country. At the moment, we've got Russia invading Ukraine for various reasons. You have Iran destabilising the Middle East. You have China and North Korea and Russia and Iran essentially in a partnership or an axis together. So I think democracies are essentially set up to be peaceful. We react to offensive actions, and we're talking about this today because we're not blind and we can see, and we're being told that there will be offensive action whether we like it or not, and we're trying to deter that. So I'm not sure how much more we could do to prepare for peace than we already do. I think we need to try and deter war from breaking out by making it very clear to very large aggressive countries that it's going to be too costly if you do, and because we'll fight back.
Former Chief of Navy once said to a select group,
The government can build as many warships as it likes, I just cannot man them. I think what Lincoln has alerted us to today, and we need to come back to this grounding from time to time, is that we can talk about bright shiny objects as long as we like. We can talk about policies and systems, but unless we actually get involved and pay for it, it isn't going to happen. And yet the Ukraine war, if it teaches anything, teaches us that the wherewithal is more important than who's actually firing it. The Ukrainians fired more missiles in the first 6 months than the entire United States forces fire in 7 years of peacetime training. They had to be developed, and the Ukrainians are developing them on the run. We have the opportunity to develop things now and put them into practice before we're forced to do it on the run. And I have to tell you, I'd much prefer to do it before I'm having to scrabble around in the dirt. And I think Lincoln has alerted us to those sort of issues today, and I'd like to thank him very much for coming and speaking to us. I think it was a very sobering talk, but it was also a challenging one, and we should take what he said today away with us. And I think it was very important. He made the point is that no government in living memory has got this right. So Lincoln, thank you very much. We'd like to give you a certificate for 12 months membership, and also a tie. You'll note it's the right colour for Lincoln. It certainly wasn't that dreadful maroon colour from north of the border.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and it really was a great honour to come here, and I appreciate it. Thank you.